All right, let's dive in. We're tackling power and control today, specifically in Neil Gaiman's The Sandman.
Oh, a good one.
Yeah, we've got a ton of articles, your notes from the series.
Yeah.
It's a pretty hefty collection, actually. But it's such a fascinating world, right? Dreams, mythology, and then you've got those endless, each one like embodying a fundamental force, dream, death, desire.
Right.
But what I find really interesting is how those characters, the endless and even the human ones, how they wrestle with power.
Yeah.
It makes you think about our own like struggles with control, in the real world.
That's about right.
So to help us navigate all of this, we have an expert well-versed in all things Sandman.
Well, The Sandman isn't just a fantasy epic. I mean, it really holds up a mirror to humanity's long and complicated relationship with power. And Gaiman gives us these figures, these grand mythic figures like the Endless, but their struggles are surprisingly relatable.
Okay, so let's start with Morpheus then, Lord of Dreams. He's not exactly your typical powerful, commanding, kind of ruler, is he?
Not really. No, there's this reluctance there.
Yeah.
Almost like it's a burden to him.
Yeah, like he doesn't want it.
Exactly. Morpheus, he's also known as Dream, right? And he seems almost trapped by tradition. He views this role as a duty.
Yeah.
Not an opportunity. And this rigidity, this clinging to the old ways, it creates tension in his realm. The dreaming, it's almost like he's stifling its potential.
Right. And that tension, it really explodes, dramatically with the Corinthian.
Right.
This nightmare that Morpheus created to, inspire fear in humanity, but then the Corinthian just goes rogue. So is this just a rebellious, creation, or is there something more to it?
I think it's deeper than just disobedience. I think the Corinthians' rebellion, it exposes this fundamental crack in Morpheus's control. He creates this nightmare.
Yeah.
This being meant to embody fear.
Right.
But it ends up embodying the fear of unchecked power, like the creator losing control of his creation, and it forces Morpheus to confront these limits of his own authority.
So it's almost like the story is asking, can any ruler, even Dream, truly control something as primal as fear? It's not just about dictating, it's about understanding these deeper forces at play.
Exactly. It's not enough for him to just be Dream.
Right.
He has to learn what that means, and his journey, it's about this evolution, not just wielding power. It's about understanding it.
And speaking of nuances, let's bring in the other Endless. Because they each wield their power so differently. Like Death, she's gentle and compassionate, but then you have Desire, who's all about manipulation and chaos. It's such a stark contrast.
I think those contrasts are very deliberate. Like, take Death. She embodies the end, right? The end of everything.
Yeah.
But she acts with incredible empathy.
It's true.
And this challenges how we think about power, doesn't it? It shows that true strength can lie in acceptance, in understanding, not just brute force.
But Desire is almost the opposite, right? Always scheming, stirring up trouble, especially when it comes to Morpheus. It's like they're using power for completely selfish reasons.
Well, Desire embodies those base desires within us all. Like yearning, ambition, the hunger for things that we can't have. And when those desires are thwarted, which often happens when it comes to Morpheus, it breeds resentment and this desire to control or punish.
So it's less about the type of power you have and more about the intention behind it.
Absolutely.
That's where things get dangerous.
Exactly.
And then we have Destiny.
Oh, yes.
Representing a completely different kind of power. Fate. Unchangeable, a path already written. It makes you think about free will, doesn't it? Like, do we really have any?
It does.
Because he knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you have Delirium, who is like the total opposite of Destiny, pure chaos.
Delirium represents that breakdown, that unraveling, and it really highlights her existence, the need for boundaries. Even the most powerful forces need that framework, that structure to operate within. Otherwise, it all falls apart.
So it's like Gaiman's showing us this entire spectrum, isn't he?
Yeah.
Control and chaos, compassion, fate. But it's not just the Endless who are dealing with this. The human characters, they get caught up in these power struggles too, don't they?
Absolutely. They're the ones who really highlight the cost.
Yeah.
The human cost of these cosmic battles. Even a brush with the Endless can change their lives forever.
Like Rose Walker. The Dream Vortex, she's a normal woman.
Right.
Suddenly, she's in this position of immense power, able to reshape the dreaming. That's got to be terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Rose's experience, it forces us to consider what happens when ordinary people, just like us, are suddenly given extraordinary power.
Yeah.
And she becomes this conduit, this force she doesn't even understand.
Yeah.
and it challenges the idea that we can control power. Sometimes it controls us.
So is it a blessing, a curse, or a little bit of both?
I think it's both. And I think Rose's story is a reminder that power, even when it's seemingly given to us, comes with this huge responsibility.
Yeah.
And navigating that, it's rarely straightforward.
Okay, now we have Lyda Hall. And her story, I mean, it's so heartbreaking. She loses her husband, then she's facing the potential loss of her unborn child. And it pushes her to the edge to make choices that, I don't know, they blur the lines between love and control.
Lyda, she embodies that primal power of a mother's love.
Yeah.
But also how that love, when it gets mixed up with grief and fear, can become controlling.
Right.
Even possessive.
Yeah.
And it makes us ask, where does protection end and control begin?
It's a fine line. And I think a lot of parents can relate to that urge to shield their children, from harm, even if it means tough choices.
Exactly.
But you see in her story that those choices can have these unintended consequences. We can't control the outcome, even with the best intentions.
No, you can't. Lyda's journey is this cautionary tale, I think.
Yeah.
It reminds us that power, even in the name of love, needs boundaries. Otherwise, it becomes a prison, not just for the ones we're trying to protect, but for ourselves too.
Now let's talk about Hobgadling. Morpheus grants him immortality. He's a fascinating character, living outside of time as we know it, to experience centuries of human history. I imagine that power, that perspective, would fundamentally change how you see life, wouldn't it?
Hobbes' story is so unique because he's not, shaping reality or wielding magic.
Right.
He has the power of time.
Yeah.
Perspective. He sees civilizations rise and fall, the patterns of human behavior repeating over and over.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, does all that experience lead to wisdom?
Right.
Or just a weary acceptance of humanity's flaws?
It's something we probably all think about, right? Like, how do we make sense of this complicated world?
We do.
Do we try to control it or just, accept the things we can't change?
Yeah. And I think that's the brilliance of the Sandman, these fantastical stories, these larger-than-life characters. But at the heart of it, they're asking very human questions, questions we all face.
Exactly. And on that note, let's take a moment to consider those questions. We'll be back in a bit to explore even more of this intricate world of the Sandman. So we've been talking about how the Sandman uses these mythic figures, these endless, to explore power and control. But I think it's those human characters who get caught in the middle that really make it hit home.
Yeah, those human stories are key. They keep everything grounded. Remind us that even in a world of dreams and magic, human choices still have weight.
Absolutely. Like, take Rose Walker. She becomes the dream vortex. Imagine being handed the controls to this immense power, this force that could reshape the dreaming. I mean, where would you even begin?
Rose's story, it's about more than just the weight of that power, I think. It's about how chaotic power can be.
Yeah.
The dream vortex, it's like this force of nature. It chooses her, she doesn't choose it. And it really throws into question, like, the idea that we can actually control power.
Right.
Because sometimes it controls us.
It's like no matter how good your intentions are, or even if you're, actively trying to do the right thing, there can be these unforeseen consequences.
Exactly. Rose's whole journey, it's about accepting that responsibility that comes with power, even if it's dumped on you, and just trying to navigate all those uncertainties.
Right. And then there's Lyda Hall. Oh, her story just gets to me. She loses her husband, and then she's facing losing her child, too. It pushes her to do things that, well, they make you question the line between love and control.
She's such a powerful image of a mother's love. It's primal.
Yeah.
But her story also shows how that love, when it gets twisted up with grief and fear, how easily it can turn into something controlling.
It's true.
Even possessive. And it really makes you think, like, at what point does wanting to protect someone, become, trying to control them?
It is a really fine line. I think any parent can relate to that need to protect their kids, even if it means making really difficult choices. But her story shows how even those choices, even with the best of intentions, they can backfire. You just can't control everything.
No, you really can't. I think her story is a warning.
Definitely.
A reminder that even power that comes from love needs boundaries. Or it can become a prison, and not just for the person you're trying to protect, but for you too.
That's so true. Now, we can't forget Hobgadling. He chose immortality. That's a whole other kind of power, isn't it? It's not about, shaping the world or anything. It's about experiencing it across centuries. Can you imagine seeing empires rise and fall, humanity's best and worst moments playing out over and over and over again.
It's an incredible thought. And his story is so interesting because he's not out there seeking power. It's a gift.
Yeah.
But that gift gives him this unparalleled perspective. He's like a walking record of history. And it begs a question, does seeing so much, does it lead to wisdom? Or just this kind of tired acceptance?
Oh. It makes you think about how we each make sense of the world, right? This crazy, complicated world. Do we try to control it or just learn to let go of the things we can't change?
It's a question we all grapple with.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the Sandman so brilliant. These stories, they're fantastical, larger than life.
Yeah.
But the questions at the heart of them, they're so human.
They really are. And you know what? I'm seeing a theme here. It's like the human stories, they're not just side stories. They're like these reflections of the endless. Like Rose, she's struggling with this unpredictable power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like Morpheus. And Lyta, with her need to protect her son, well, that echoes desire in a way.
Absolutely.
And then there's Hob, his immortality. It's like Destiny's perspective, timeless.
You're right. It's like Gaiman is creating these parallel narratives. He's showing us that those big themes, power and control, they're not just confined to these, otherworldly beings. They play out in our lives too, in our relationships.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah. It's like he's saying, look, you've got these mythic figures embodying these larger-than-life forces, but those same forces, they're at work within us too, shaping our desires, our fears, how we see the world.
Exactly. And by exploring them in both these grand, fantastical ways and through these deeply human stories, the Sandman gives us this much more nuanced and relatable look at power, more than, your typical morality tale ever could.
It's about understanding that power isn't just about brute force. It's about resilience, too, and compassion and acceptance.
And it's about understanding that power is everywhere. It's shaping the choices we make, the lives we lead, and how we're remembered.
And even when we feel like we have no power, the choices we make, they ripple outwards, affecting not just us, but the people around us.
Maybe that's one of the most empowering things about the Sandman.
What's that?
That even when these enormous forces seem to be in control, our actions still matter.
I like that.
We have the power to shape our own stories. And by doing that, we become part of something bigger, something hopeful.
Okay, now, that is a beautiful thought. And it's the perfect segue into the final part of our Sandman deep dive. We're going to be talking about what happens when power runs unchecked, the fallout, but also the potential for redemption. Okay, so we've talked about how power shows up, in all these different ways in the Sandman, from the cosmic level of the endless down to those really personal struggles of, just regular people. But what happens when that power, when it just goes unchecked? What are the consequences of overreaching, trying to control things that are just, beyond us?
That's where the Sandman takes us to some really dark places. We've already seen hints of it.
Yeah.
Like with Lyta. Her desire to protect her son, it leads her down this dangerous road. But Gaiman, he doesn't shy away from showing us the full potential for things to go wrong, for power to corrupt when it's used recklessly or just, plain cruelly.
Yeah, one example that always sticks with me is John Dee, Dr. Destiny. He gets his hands on Dream's ruby.
Right.
This powerful artifact, it can warp reality, and he uses it to just cause chaos and suffering. It's chilling. It really shows you what happens when power falls into the wrong hands.
It's not just about abusing power, though. It's like he perverts it.
Yeah.
This object, it was meant for creation, for shaping dreams. And he twists it into this tool of destruction. And I think it's this stark reminder that even the most potent forces, the most incredible powers, they can be used for good or for evil. It all comes down to intention. What's in the heart of the one wielding it?
It's like he's a dark mirror image of Morpheus in a way.
You're right.
They're both capable of, shaping reality. But their reasons for doing it, their understanding of, what it means to have that kind of power, completely different.
There's a definite parallel there. Dr. Destiny, he represents that shadow side of Dream, that potential for darkness that honestly probably exists in all of us, even the endless, if we give in to those darker impulses.
And you've got a Burgess, the one who imprisons Morpheus at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
His motives, they're not as outwardly evil as Dr. Destiny's, but it's still coming from that same place, that need for control, that belief that he can just manipulate forces he doesn't even begin to understand.
Burgess, he embodies hubris, that arrogance that so often comes with craving power. He wants to use Dream.
Right.
to exploit him for his own selfish gain. And he completely misses the true nature of what he's trapped to, like that classic story, The one who tries to control forces beyond his grasp, he ends up being consumed by them.
It makes me think about people in power in the real world, Those who get so blinded by their own ambition that they can't even see the consequences of their actions. And it just reminds you that power without any checks and balances, it leads to destruction. Not just for that person, but for everyone around them, too.
It's one of the things that makes the Sandman so relevant. Even though it's set in this fantastical world, these themes, the struggles the characters are going through, they speak to us. They echo our own experiences, our own understanding of how messy power can be.
So if we're looking at these stories as cautionary tales, what's the message then? How do we use power responsibly? Is it about giving it up entirely?
I don't think it's necessarily about giving up power altogether. It's more about understanding its limits.
Right.
Realizing that sometimes true strength comes from knowing when to let go.
Yeah. And we see that in Morpheus' story, don't we?
We do.
He starts off so rigid, so controlling, but as he goes through these trials, he softens, becomes more compassionate, more flexible.
More willing to change.
Yeah, and he learns that true leadership, it's not about dominating, it's about understanding and respecting those forces that are at work, even the ones you can't control completely.
His transformation reminds us that power isn't this fixed thing. It's fluid. You gain it, you lose it. It can be abused, but it can also be redeemed. And that redemption often comes from admitting our own weaknesses, accepting that we need connection, and remembering that we have a responsibility to use whatever power we have for good.
And maybe it's also about recognizing the power we do have. Even if it doesn't seem like, a lot, we have the power to choose, to act, to make a difference in the world, even in small ways.
Exactly. And those choices, those acts of courage, those moments of compassion, they ripple outwards. They shape not just our own lives, but the lives of those around us. In a way, I think that's the most powerful message the Sandman gives us.
What's that?
That even in a world where these huge, overwhelming forces seem to be in control, we still matter. Our actions still matter. We have the power to write our own stories. And by doing that, we become part of something bigger, something better.
That's a beautiful thought. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive into the Sandman. I want to thank you, dear listener, for coming along on this journey with us. And we've only just scratched the surface of this amazing, intricate story. But I hope our exploration has, sparked some ideas, maybe given you a fresh perspective on these big themes, these ideas of power and control and the choices we make. Because let's face it, both those things, they're always